Thank you very much. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here. I struggled to make the link. I'm certainly not an expert in beta. I can maybe talk about beta-carotene, which is a color that is used in food and beverage. And I'm not even going to talk about emerging markets. I'm going to talk about something called high-growth markets. What I'll do is I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of the fragrance and flavor industry, talk about why high-growth markets are so important to Givaudan, and then really what Givaudan is doing in terms of its presence in high-growth markets. You know, you use the products that Givaudan produces every day. 25% of everything that you put in your supermarket, unless you're only drinking water, is a Givaudan fragrance or flavor. We hold 25% of the market. And so really from the moment that you wake up in the morning and brush your teeth to the moment that you go to bed in the evening and put cream on your face, you're using a product that contains a fragrance or contains a flavor. So really we touch you and millions of consumers around the world every day. And maybe one of the misconceptions on Givaudan, you know, we serve thousands and thousands of customers on a daily basis. So we do serve the multinational customers, but we also serve what we call the local and regional customers. You know, some of the customers or some of the companies that have been cited here are customers of ours. We serve what we call local and regional customers. We also serve private label. And you see many of the brands and the products that we actually go into. So food and beverage, 50% of our sales are in flavor. And then the other 50% is in what we call household personal care, or fine fragrance or perfume. And typically, if you look at the cost of a fragrance or flavor, we are a very, very small amount into the cost of the final product. Something that doesn't matter whether you call a market, a mature market, a high growth, or an emerging market, is that ultimately people repurchase products because they like the smell or because they like the taste. So the first time that you buy a product, you buy it because of the marketing, you buy it because you've seen the advert on the TV, but ultimately if you don't like the smell, if you don't like the taste, you will not repurchase. And so really the fragrance is the key driver behind a consumer repurchase. Why do you buy a perfume? You buy a perfume because it smells great. But also, why do you buy a yogurt? You buy a yogurt because you like the taste. So the first time you buy it, you believe it's good for you, it contains a probiotic, but ultimately, and if you have children, I'm sure you know this, if they don't like the taste, they will not repurchase again. So repurchase is driven by fragrance and flavors. A highly consolidated market. Actually, we are 4 players that actually make up around 65% of the market. You'll notice actually none of the players come from what we'll call high growth markets. So Givaudan is the leader with 25%. And you see actually our neighbor Firmenich is the second player in the market. Third is IFF, and fourth is Symrise. The top 10 players in the market hold around 90%. And many, many barriers to entry into this market. There has been no new entrant in this market over the last 100 years. So high barriers to entry. High barriers to entry and many barriers. So it's not just a question of technology. It's understanding the consumer. It's really developing products. It's raw material sourcing, which I will also talk about, but multifaceted barriers to entry. I talk very quickly about why we call it high growth markets. You know, the first is really from an economic perspective, and you know, Jonathan and Wolfgang can certainly talk about this much better than I. But if you look at, if you look at equivalent purchasing power parity, really today high growth markets are the biggest driver in terms of demand. We tend to look actually more at the potential of these markets. And I will come back to many of the drivers of these markets. We're looking very much at population and urbanization. So, you know, we are not interested in some cases in countries. We're really interested in urbanized populations. We're not interested in Nigeria. We're interested in Lagos as a population, as an example. And high growth for us indicates the potential and the growth capacity of these markets. A couple of things that are not on here, and actually I was discussing last night with Constantino, you know, also for our employees and for our customers, to talk about emerging markets really gives the wrong perception. We talk about the potential of a market. To say to an Indian employee, you're an emerging market employee, one day you're going to make it, it just doesn't give the right message. And it's certainly the same when we talk about customers. So high growth is more about the potential. And many of the challenges that we face, that we see in, let's say, mature markets, if we talk about things like levels of diabetes in many countries, you have many countries with much higher levels of diabetes in high growth markets, and customers of Givaudan who look to reduce sugar content to address some of these markets. You know, levels of technology in high growth markets are as high in terms of usage as mature markets. So really for us it's a high growth market story as opposed to an emerging market story. Maybe just one number to take away from this slide. You see that 85% of population growth over the next 15 years will come from Asia and from Africa. Population growth for us is important, but actually what's more important for us is urbanization. When people move into the cities, they consume packaged goods, they consume food and beverage, and HPC, household and personal care, that contains fragrances and flavors. And so as people move into cities and as people's purchasing power increases, they consume more fragrances and consume more flavors. And if you just look at the urbanization rates today in China, you know, urbanization rates are around 50%, expected to grow to 70%. Urbanization today in the US is around 80%. Actually, in Brazil, urbanization is higher in Brazil, around 85%. Compared to the US. So a higher level of urbanization. What's really driving the growth in markets like Brazil is actually consumer spending power. We think long-term and we communicate financially long-term. We have a 5-year strategy. For those financial analysts that look at quarterly EPS, I'm sorry, we're not one of those companies. So we give a 5-year strategy, 2016 to 2020, really split into 3 areas. And you see the first is growing with our customers. And the first area of focus is what we call high growth markets. 80% of our growth over the next 5 years will come from high growth markets. The second pillar is what we call delivering with excellence. So it's how do we convert that growth of 4 to 5% into free cash flow in the most efficient way. And the third is what we call partnering for shared success. So how do we make sure that we have the right people in the right countries? And how do we make sure that our supplier base continues to deliver the products that we want, particularly as more and more of a trend towards what we call natural products. Maybe a more down-to-earth example, and I took just one here, Latin America, and in particular, if you look at Brazil, maybe some surprising facts for you. Brazil is the number 2 market today for deodorants. Okay. It used to be actually the number 1 market for fine fragrance, but you know, because of the weakness of the Brazilian real, it's now number 2. Many years ago, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, people said perfume, fine fragrance, it's Paris and it's New York. Okay. Now really, Brazil, as you see, is the 2nd market. It's the number 2 also for what we call for bar soap or toilet soap, and it's the number 3 market for hair care. So you can see how a single country can really dominate a particular segment. Brazilians love scent. It's very, very simple. And you can also see how local customers capture a market like that. And for those of you that know the companies in South America, you have two very, very well-known companies, Natura and Boticario. Natura, who recently bought Body Shop. Boticario, who is a private company in Brazil. They understand the local market, and they really dominate the local market in Brazil. So they understand the consumers, they're close to consumers, and very, very difficult for multinationals to enter that market. Just a few minutes now on the network. We are a Swiss quoted company, but we have a very, very local presence. And just give you a few facts and figures. If you look at the split of our presence in what we call high growth versus mature market, so we have just under 100 locations around the world, 50% of our locations in what we call high growth markets. 18 of our production sites, so half of our production sites are in high growth markets. We produce in China not because it's cheap, and you've heard that it's getting more and more expensive. We produce in China because we make to order, and our customers typically expect a lead time of between 7 to 10 days. Okay? So very, very fast turnaround. And so we produce in China because we want to be close to our customers and we want to react quickly to what's happening in the market. We produce in Indonesia simply because we want to be close to our customers, and the infrastructure, and India is a very good example as well, infrastructure is not strong enough to be able to export into these countries. And you see nearly 50% of our employees today in what we call high growth markets. Our research, basic research, is split between the US, Switzerland, and China. So today we do basic research in China, to really capture on one of the points made by Wolfgang. Just some of the investments that we've made, and actually around 80% of our capital investments over the last 5 years have been in what we call high growth markets, and really going forward, those are the markets that we'll continue to invest in. So Latin America, we really invested over the last 5 years, particularly in Brazil and also in Argentina. In China, we opened a second flavor facility in a town called Nantong. Maybe you don't know Nantong. Jonathan does know it, actually. It's a city of 6 million people, just north of Shanghai, so more or less just slightly less than the population of Switzerland. India, we will open a second manufacturing facility this year in Pune, so just outside of Mumbai. And actually, last year we opened labs in Pakistan. And you see that we're not just opening production facilities. What our customers want to do is they want to be able to come into the labs and they want to develop local products that fit with local consumer needs. They want to be able to do it quickly. They don't want to travel. So they really want to be able to go and speak to, let's say, local employees of Givaudan who understand the market. So we don't have expats in Pakistan. We have local people who understand food and beverage, who understand HPC, and they develop products for the market in Pakistan. Singapore, we actually opened a second fragrance school. So for those of you that know Givaudan, we have a first perfume school in Paris, where we take a number of graduates every year, where we take around 3 or 4 graduates per year. They spend 4 years in the school, where they learn about perfume, and then they go and work in different markets. And Singapore is actually our second school, so it's actually a satellite of our school in Paris. And the reason that we opened in Singapore is because of the demand in Asia for people that understand what's happening, what countries in Asia want from a cultural preference in terms of fragrance. And, we continued to expand in Singapore. Singapore is really one of our hubs in Asia. And then finally, on the right, you see where we've opened in particularly Africa and Middle East. Actually, in 2016, we continued to open offices in Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and Algeria. A company that is well balanced, and if you look back over the presentation over the last 10 minutes, 50% of our sales in fragrances, 50% of our sales in flavors, so very, very well balanced in terms of the split between the two sectors. 55% of our sales today in what we call mature markets. It's interesting, we talked today about high growth. Ironically, this year is the first year where our mature markets grow faster than our high growth markets. So maybe not the best subject for today. But if you look back historically over the last 7 years, what we call our high growth markets typically grew between 4 and 5 times as fast as mature markets. And particularly during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, all of the growth came from our high growth markets. In terms of customers and products, extremely well spread. Today we produce around 60,000 products per year. So taste and smell, very, very local. If you drink a carbonated soft drink today in the US, it's different to a carbonated soft drink in Mexico. The sugar is different, it's coming from a different source, and consumers want different tastes. And around 15% of our products change every year. So every year we need to innovate. Every year our customers are looking for an innovation. In 2016, actually 90% of our growth came from what we call local and regional customers. Okay, so a strong presence with local and regional customers. 50% of our sales today are with what we call local and regional customers. And, currency, we are naturally well hedged. Actually, we sell in the US, 25% of our sales in the US. We produce in the US and we source in the US. Just on sourcing, we buy 10,000 raw materials a year. About 50% of our raw materials are synthetic, 50% are natural, and we buy from many, many countries. So we buy a plant called Ylang Ylang, very similar to the plant that you showed at the beginning, a small yellow flower coming from the Comoros Islands. We source vanilla from Madagascar. We source clove from Indonesia. We source mint from India. Many countries are part of our supply chain, and our customers today, not only do they want security of supply, but they also want ethical sourcing. They want to make sure that their supply chain is well protected and that we're not using child labor as an example. So a strong focus on origination and a strong focus on sourcing. Just a couple of numbers for the financial community. You saw our 2020 strategy and what does it mean in terms of growth. So we aim to grow on average 4 to 5% over the next 5 years. Last year we grew at 4.2%, so that was the first year of our 5-year cycle. We focus very much on free cash flow conversion. So as I said, we're not focused on EPS. We expect to deliver between 12 and 17% of free cash flow over the next 5 years. And, something that is, is probably very relevant, particularly in Switzerland today, we pay a dividend which has increased year on year since the spin-off. We pay that in Swiss francs, so that's probably a currency that you do recognize. So we pay a Swiss franc, a hard currency dividend. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening and look forward to the questions. Thank you very much.